Testing 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2, 3. Hello there, brave hearts, urbanites, and Coach Mad Hatters. And happy 4th of July. It is about 2:30 Eastern Time. And before the communal celebrations began, I decided to pop on here and do part 3 of the Keynotes to Self tipping of the Hourglass. Mainly because we only have one more segment after this one before it will be complete. And part 3 has been prolonged, or should I say, the recording of part 3 had been prolonged for several days. I want to say damn near a week or so, which was not anticipated. Much was going on, and I'm very happy with myself that I allowed myself to lean in to the challenging moments and to see certain bits and pieces of life unfold before I did, um, mainly because it gave me examination of the cards that we will be discussing in this segment. So let's just recap for a moment. The layout of the cards is in a circular motion with the Justice card in the middle. So the Justice card sits at the heart of the spread. At the top of this clockwise layout, which I have adopted with regards to how I view it, is the Death card, and then on around to the Two of Swords and the Lovers, then into the bottom of the hourglass, as I like to call it, is the Five of Swords, the Ten of Swords, and the Three of Cups. And then in the next segment, we will be talking about the King of Pentacles, the Ace of Swords, and the Justice card in the heart of the spread. But what's quite interesting is how I would get up every day from the moment that I finished part 2 of this series, leading into part 3. Every day I would get up with the intention to record it, but the energy to record it wasn't quite there, as well as taking into consideration the major hesitance that I had around actually pushing the record button, reconciling my thoughts, trying to get everything aligned to fit into the energy to produce this portion of the series. There was just this heavy pull of hesitation. And at first, I was getting frustrated with it. And then a notion came upon me to just allow things to unfold in its proper context, as well as appreciate what I am now considering divine timing. And that usually, when I give into that, when I surrender to that, when I affirm that, things happen just as they supposed to. So I honestly feel that this time and space is actually when I am supposed to be recording it. So, in light of Independence Day, and I'm going to take it completely out of the social and historical context of Independence Day, and we're going to hone into the emotional aspects of this day and how it's so fitting for the Five of Swords, the Ten of Swords, and the Ten of Cups energy. So, as the opener of this particular session, I pulled an Angels and Ancestors Oracle, and the card that popped out is the Traveler, and it says move in a new direction, which is also amazingly fitting because we are now in the mix of tapping into new paradigms so that we may begin to quilt a new narrative. In doing so, I honestly believe that we are still being challenged inside the call of duty to not necessarily forget our historical context or even try to erase it in some kind of way. Through this lens, it feels to me that we are being called to angle the approach from the stance of transmuting this energy. So, in the narrative of the alchemist, the journey is quest with taking lead based material, that heavy, weighty, seemingly unpliable material, and working it until it transforms into gold. So the same is the route of from coal to diamond. Within that process is a highly ultra pressurized structure, as well as the intricate details that goes into what it takes from coal to diamond, from lead to gold. Most often, those pressurized elements within those processes really do um, equate to the Five of Swords and the Ten of Swords energies. So, the Five of Swords, it is the notion, or it's the awareness of energy surrounding defeat and dishonor and loss and trauma and trial, as well as the Ten of Swords. But here's the remarkable thing about the Ten of Swords. It also is a signal, if you will, of entering into a new cycle. The Ten of Swords and the fact that it found itself at the bottom of the hourglass allows me to tap into the notions that we are now in time of recuperation. We are emerging from the darkness. It also stands as the perfect segue into us acknowledging the fact that these heavy, weighty energies will persist if we are slow to engage it, if we are slow to face it. But it also signifies the tipping of a new day, emerging from the darkness. And I know, all depending on how we define darkness, it can become a bit intimidating when one has to contemplate its individual shadows as well as the weight of the collective shadows that we are now finding ourselves maneuvering in. But inside the language of tarot, the number 10 is the reset moment. It is the moment when you click back into one. The slates are cleaned and we begin anew. Most often in these major course directions, these course, and I'm trying to refrain from calling it a course correction, because naming it a course correction would, to me, indicate that somehow there were course mistakes. And when we're talking about the human experience, right or wrong, good and evil, those are notions that are highly subjective. Honestly, in this society of this thing called morality, what one person considers right or wrong may not necessarily be for another. And we do have these major pools of elevated percentages with what's considered right and wrong, good and evil. If we take into the account of the American narrative, most often anyone that looks like me, folk of melanated frequency, has always been the bad, the evil, the downtrodden, the wretched. When on the flip side of the narrative, there are other cultural denominations that are considered lightness and righteous and do-gooders, if you will. We are now at a time, as far as I can see it, where we are being challenged to blend the two. We are being invited to seek a lens that shows the coin of both sides, and that you honestly can't have one without the other, and that the way that it is viewed is honestly upon the beholder. There honestly is beauty in the turmoil. Now, it doesn't mean that while you are amidst that turmoil that you are expected to instantly find the beauty, nor does it mean you are to totally disregard the fact that trauma exists. We have gotten to a point where the word, the definition, the context surrounding victimization is now into overdrive. It's almost became a weapon of shame, even for those that are honestly, truly victims. That somehow we want to skirt around that which thrusts the victim into victimization. And so the Ten of Swords here, in my opinion, is to help us focus on how to transmute all of this heavy energy. So it goes without saying, but of course I will say that everyone is being invited to step into the mode of the magician, the mode of the alchemist. Furthermore, the sacred alchemist, and what it is that we do with our minds and our hearts, how we begin to contour our perceptions that will toggle freely, ebb and flow freely between that which is considered lightness and darkness. So, in conjunction with today's full moon, and it happens to be the full moon in Capricorn, which is particularly a rare full moon because it's an eclipsed full moon. And as a novice scholar of astrology, especially archetypal astrology, I have been meditating frequently on the characteristics around the moon and challenging myself to hone in deeper in how it plays out in my unique personality and emotionality. And as I've mentioned throughout this series, the moon is in my first house, as well as my being of Virgo moon. So a lot of communication around how I feel is always at the forefront of all of my engagements. I am a very clear spoken person. Now, I know in many instances, those that have had the opportunity to read or experience my communications in print say that I am rather lofty when it comes to my choices of vocabulary. And I get it. I've been that way since I was a child. I've always been attracted to big words and finding out what they mean and how they fit into my comprehension span. I also understand that many that I am encircled with are not as obsessive with it as I am. So I've had the proper practice of needing to further explain and to unpack it or drill it down a little bit and find other words that would equate to the rather bigger one. So inside that notion of finding common denominators or breaking it down has not only been my challenge but also my blessing, because it keeps me in practice not only with one of the loves of my life, which is language and vocabulary, but also in my attempts to sustain the conversations within my sacred engagements, my trusts and bonds with my beloveds. But then it gets to a point, and this has been a running theme with me and a few of my close associates and friends and family, where we are looking into the angle on how we define. So, inside my urban circles, we have this saying where we say, "You feel me?" And on so many levels, that could mean so many different things. It could, especially, I'll say that the main core spectrum is figuratively or literally. But then I also take it a step further, just me being who I am, and I tap into the emotional and the omniversal, the numinous sections of the term, "you feel me." Because the energies of the moon, I feel. And when I am in my quietude, my conversations with the moon, when the notion comes up, as if Luna is asking me, "Okay, Thea, do you feel me?" And I have to, in that moment, respond yay or nay. And if I'm ever in conversation or in communion with the moon and I don't quite get it or I don't feel it, if I answer no, it amazes me how either a person, place, or thing will cross my path that will show me in a different type of formation, and I will instantly click back to when me and the moon was having a conversation and that moment when I didn't understand something. So I often smile to myself about the inner ahas that I'll have in conjunction with the conversations that are running in the background. And the background I associate is the corridor between my head and my heart. I'm always in constant recognition of when my mind and my heart are not in alignment with one another, when they are not in bliss with one another. Usually, my moods will depict when something is out of alignment. Either I am thinking too much on something or I'm feeling too much on something. And it be my job to find the balance. I have to make stuff make sense to me. I'm such a clarifier. on so many levels. I'm a clarifier. So I am one of those that would be considered highly inquisitive. Now, I don't always pose my questions or my inquiries to other humans. Usually, I will think it and I will pose my question inward, and it usually isn't in any specificity. It's usually, okay, I'm confused about this. Help me make sense of this. Make this make sense to me. And if I'm ever in conversation with another human, I will get the nudge to ask a question or listen a little bit more intently, knowing that I am now on the hunt for an answer so that I may obtain my clarity. Clarity is a very valuable thing to me because it seems like so much can go awry when there is misconceptions or there's misunderstanding in the mix. And so it makes me wonder if I was held off from doing this particular session because in the days past, the recent past, much was very confusing to me, not on all levels, but it seemed like the more significant levels of how I exist and those whom I exist with, or hope to exist with, or hope to be at some point in engagement with, and how I have to challenge myself to know that so much is unfolding, whether it's in the physical or the non physical, in conjunction to little old me. And just because I see it this way does not necessarily mean that that is actually the way that it is, or the way that it ought to be, if I can be completely honest in this moment. And so I've noticed that I've become sensitive to the moments when I or anyone else is quite comfortable in my assumption, to the point where I stubbornly do not want to ask questions to gain a better understanding because I'm very stubborn in how I figure it is. And lo and behold, 9 times out of 10, one or two questions, even if I figure like I'm not going to like the answer, it still it still contributes to my value of clarity. Because just because I don't like it does not mean I am not due to get clear on something. But more and more, I am noticing that we will hide behind our assumptions mainly because we are not either ready or in the mood to receive anything that will agitate us even further. Now, remember, we're stepping outside of the context that establishes this thing called right and wrong, or the so called righteousness or wretchedness. We're in the eye of it. The heart of this conversation is justice. And to me, the constant companion of justice is clarity, is a better understanding. And so when we tap into the sentiment of, do you feel me? I would go as far to say that the tone and the gestures by which things are spoken is where most of the confusion and the misconstruedness comes into play. And on a more collective level, we seem not to want to stay until the conversation is over, or we would like to break up sentences or halt the ushering of things unfolding to get to the better clarity. And what I mean when I say that, I have been an observer as well as a constituent of conversations where someone will be talking and midstream, it's like, nah, okay, I get it. I don't want to hear no more. I get it. And it's like, allow safe space for the entire sides of this multiplex of narrative to unfold. And so I've been challenging myself to cease with the interruptions, allow someone to completely finish what it is that they have to say. And trust me when I say, I don't always enter into conversations where I know exactly the words to choose that will properly depict the way I'm feeling about something. Some of my ahas are works in progress. Like until I am knee deep inside of the conversation, do I find the words. And it's usually because of the free toggling back and forth that we allow the conversation to have, where I can start off this way, but through that conversation, better understanding emerges. And by the time the conversation is done, I have a brand new angle by which I am able to view certain things. And so this morning, I tapped into this thing called unconditional conversations. And in my 48 years on this planet, within inside of this lifetime, I unfortunately have not seen very many moments where the space is safe enough for unconditional conversations, where no one's refereeing anyone's word structure or presentation of paradigm or perspective, that I or anyone else involved does not come in with the expectation of you're either on this side or on that side. That it's grand neutral territory to just be able to unpack and unhash some shit. And nobody's taking sides. Inside of a circle, there are no sides. There is a fluctuation and an ebb and flowing and a defluctuation, if that's even a word. Is that a word? I don't know. Forgive me if it's not a word. I'm somewhere else right now. I when I got up this morning, I told the frequency of the moon that she could have her way with me today, that I would serve as a transparent conduit to feel how I feel and express accordingly. So words may, they may not be as proper as I would like them to be, but I'm going to go with it. So the Ten of Swords at the bottom of the hour. And I'll even share my hope. The hope that I have for this divine feminine force that comes with the full moon in Capricorn at the height of eclipse season. Well, maybe it's narrowing down now, but the energy is still as forceful and as potent, that we find the patience to allow and host the safe spaces of unconditional conversations. That we just give people and ourselves the opportunities to just state how it's feeling at that moment and hone in, ask questions, become inquisitive from another angle. And right now, it does. It feels very um, hoopla-ish because I'm cliche-ish because I know that it's often said, and it's often said in marketing ploys for us to be receptive and for us to lend space to the conflict and for us to look chaos in its eyes with this welcoming, opened arms, lay down and take it type of energy. And I beg to differ. But I do wonder if I should, inside of this wish, throw in there that even in the midst of standing your ground, that you, we, us, me, we, love and light to the prolific Muhammad Ali with his poem, which went into record as the shortest poem of that time, which is me, we. So profound that we just in the back of our mind become sensitive to, let me find out more about this before I completely go the fuck off. Or let me tap into another angle because maybe there's something there waiting on me that will gain me the enlightenment that I need so that I may get the best that I can during my modes of communication. Because at the end of the day, we really do, if I'm not mistaken, all seek that level of enlightenment so that not only may we counsel ourselves more appropriately, but be able to share and lend the quality of wisdom that honestly heals and reveals. And I know we're angry about shit. And I know it's high time that certain situations provide the clues and cues for a better day, and that some of this fuckery is way overdue. It has run its welcome raw, and I know a lot about that too. But at the turning of the hourglass, and this is where we are in this time and space, is the Three of Cups. And so let's just see. Okay, so the Three of Cups is all about celebration, sharing, team spirit, friendship, unconditional love, fruition, high spirits, and the abundance of energy. And as I continue to meditate on the way that this spread is situated, it allows me a significant sense of hope that the tipping of this hourglass can serve as an emotional rite of passage where we can dismantle the hostility between communications and that path that leads to a better understanding. Respectful reciprocity is automatically invited in, and there isn't a lot of offense defense components still being allowed to prop itself up, and especially inside those conversations with those we genuinely love. And I know, like, I don't say this in ignorance or with blind sight, figuring that those aren't the most triggering of conversations to have, because they are. So, to help me expand on my points, I am going to link two other conversations that it's been hosted by Mr. Light Watkins. And I've spoken of him many times in previous recordings, mainly because he's been the guru to help me with my meditation practices and even my scholarship surrounding meditation, and how some things are just so mystified. And that's not to take away from um, anyone's choice of practice, but it is to allow space for alternative. And so, two conversations that I tapped into this morning ran very well with the theme of it being Independence Day. And of course, it doesn't take long for me to combine it into my contemplations around emotional intelligence, because I am a highly emotional being. And I'll even say this real quick before I tap off. Before I begin studying my birth chart as a core course of curriculum inside of my degree of soul scholarship, I was taking on the lopsided view of this popular perception around emotion, because it was always me showing up in situations where I was just a bit too emotional, and found myself constantly around those that did not allow for crying or anger or laughing out loud. Everyone is just so contained, and there are proper ways to act in certain situations within certain company. Needless to say, but I will, I was always the one doing the most, and I just could not understand it. It was driving me to this element where I was beginning to not like myself, and I was beginning to not trust how I would act in certain mixed company, because this whole villainization of emotions. My saving grace came inside of me saying yes to the invitation that I would walk this path with my intuitive guides, my inner invisible guides, and allow them to show me and teach me about me through the elements of my birth chart. Finding out about the moon being in my first house answered all of the questions that I couldn't find anywhere else of, around how it is that I am the way that I am when I am the way that I am. And it completely and utterly dismantled this cookie cutter notion of how I ought to be behaving inside the classification of quote unquote bad behavior. Once again, it's all in the eye of the beholder. And if I am to be true to me, this hashtag be true to you, I wonder if as a collective we really understand, we're really clear on what that means. Because there will be times where just the clash of the titans is in its natural essence, because everyone's being true. Does that mean everyone's going to get along at the same moment, at the same time, and all in one accord? No. There's different genres to music. There's different genres to the heightenedness of symphony. And they, inside that symphony, are not all flute players. They're not all tuba players. They're not all drum players. Come on. It is a it is a respectful reciprocity of Instruments that play in a chord, as well as even instruments that play in opposition, have their moment to play. And it's still all part of the grand harmony of how things ebb and flow inside of this third dimension. Completely excluding the paradigm of right or wrong makes so much way for the flexibility of expectations and the understanding that some things will be high while some things have to be low. That's just the way everything's interconnected. There will be no weight or swing to the pendulum if everything was high. That's just not the way that this works. There is a gravitational pull within certain situations and circumstances and engagements and encounters that it feels like we are being challenged to make space for. Also, in conjunction with this full moon, is the weightiness of facing the shadow realm. I always say, I am a hail star. I am a whisperer of shadows. And this is not something that I deemed for myself. I just know that I am a frequent flyer of hail, have always been. My hellishness started at 6 years old, and it took me a while to reconcile that. I literally was over 40 when I began the road of reconciliation to my shadow realm, realizing that it is not a place that I must dwell for any type of punitive nature. I am not being punished for being who I am. I am being challenged to accept and reconcile it, to blend it, to transmute it. So I'm going to end it there. Um, and maybe in the next day or two, the opportunity for us to go ahead on and close out this session will present itself. And I'm not even quite sure why I have this strong urge to close this session out, uh, but I do. So here we are. One last thing I'll say is that please stay tuned for the credits that roll after um, my spiel, after my moment of soapbox. There are some announcements and some special invitations that are being pushed out into the grapevine, and I would like your authentic consideration and hopefully your participation in some of those things as the months roll out, because there are conversations to be had. And I honestly do want to push forward the idea of unconditional conversations, those safe spaces where we do not take offense and we nurture our sensitivities versus dismiss them or saddle up to use shame and blame as weapons. We honestly dismantle the usage of shame or blame as weapons or methods of manipulation. And I also figure, now that I think about it, it's just come to me that maybe my push to get this series, and I think there's another one that I have. Yes, there's another one on the ledger that is bound to be produced, because it feels like I am approaching a threshold of another direction, meaning another angle that's going to require the majority of my time and attention. And so I feel the need to get this content uploaded before I go on and move into or shift into a different set of energies and will not really have the capacity to be recording and uploading. So that is it, my friends, my loves, my family. And yeah, so until part 4, I wish you well.